What's good, DMV and across the nation? This is the Commissioner's Corner Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Don Aduba, and if you're on the Beltway, 66, 270, I-95, or the George Washington Parkway, this is the podcast where you can learn about our Wahoo Legacy Football League and also insights on the Washington Commanders. And so today's show, we're going to be talking about how our fantasy league started and its origin. And then we'll also take a deep dive into the relative athletic score from an article from Ben Standig, a prominent Washington Commanders beat writer, and how the relative athletic score may affect the Washington Commanders draft selection process, as Adam Peters is really interested in looking at the RAS score to select their top prospects. And lastly, we'll cover a gamut of top prospects, whether they're underrated, sleepers, or just the consensus top selections that are coming up in the NFL draft this week. So this podcast is going to be dropping just a few days before the NFL draft, and I'm just really excited to share some of the content and some of the insights that I have. And it's just amazing to be able to talk about this in a fantasy football context, which I feel like is not really a big thing in the podcast space. And so that's the main reason why I wanted to start this show, is because over the last couple months I've done a lot of research, a lot of thought of starting one, and I think as a fan of fantasy football, I've always been interested when looking for teams or when managing my team. I'd be curious about players that I have on teams that I don't follow as much, and I wanted to get insights. Are they going to be players that are going to be starting, or during training camp, who's the underrated player that's going to get a lot of play in the regular season? And so I've had to scourge through message boards and go through different chats on Reddit just to see if there's like some player that I don't know about, because I feel like the national media, they don't really cover teams at a very granular level. They just kind of go for the hot takes and for just a lot of different platitudes and takes that are controversial but aren't really useful for fantasy football. So that's why I want to start the show, just to give you just the facts. Also give you insights that might help you in guiding your selection for your fantasy team. And just to give full disclosure, I am a Kansas City native and a big Chiefs fan. How about those Chiefs? So if you're a Washington Commanders fan, please don't get offended. I've lived in this area for the last 8 years, and I just feel like having listened to the radio and been exposed to media outlets here in the DC and DMV area, I've gotten to know a lot about the Washington Commanders, and obviously I have a lot of friends in the DMV who are Commanders fans, going way back to college in 2004. So I think it's just an opportunity for me to really, just to learn, just to basically just give insights on the Commanders and see if it's something that's useful here in this market. And so that's where this podcast is starting from. And also, lastly, I really want to chronicle our fantasy league in a meaningful way. So I've started this league, at least the first league I've commissioned, I think, was in 2005. And so it's been 20 years. And you can only go so long for sending out newsletters before you want to try to do something else. And I feel like I wanted to take engagement up a notch and develop a podcast and develop a newsletter, which I'll have on Substack. So it's not up now, but throughout this podcast, I'll be putting together Substacks that will provide insights on our league, our fantasy league, and also provide insights that I may see through the Washington Commander players that might be useful for you based on sources that I've collected and curated through the blogosphere, through Reddit, through specialized data analytic vlogs that or video blog or blogs that have helped me manage my fantasy football team. So yeah, let's get started with how the Wahoo Legacy League started at UVA. So this started in 2004 among dorm friends. Shout out to Dobie and Fitzhugh from first year in Yahoo that later merged in 2006. But you know, when things get competitive in fantasy football, especially between the two dorms, we had a bit of an acrimonious split. And I say this very facetiously, but yeah, these were the things that were funny, back in 2006 when life was a lot more carefree, to say the least. So I remember one of the guys on the Fitzhugh side, shout out to Juan, started a league titled College Park, emphasis on better league, in 2007. So I remember he made his own league, I made my league, and we actually had a competition between the two residencies. So for myself and my dorm mates over in, I think, Jefferson Park Avenue, over at the Crossroads, and we played against Juan's and his buddies over at Sterling, which was, I think, called College Park at the time. And we had these different competitions where we played soccer, basketball, and video games, which I think included Halo, which was the big game at the time. I was horrible at Halo, so I think I might have brought my Crossroads teammates down. But yeah, so that was like our way to kind of get all that competitive energy out. And so, once we had that competition, we merged again and began a ESPN league in 2008 called The Last Time on their platform right before we graduated college and moved our separate ways. And honestly, the ESPN league was pretty clunky, and I just did not like their setup, and the scoring system really was just awful. I feel like they counted points in integers versus fractional points, which made it really hard to determine at times who could win games because all the scores are rounded up to the highest to the next number. And so what ended up happening is we ditched the ESPN system in, I believe, 2012 or 2013, and we joined the NFL fantasy platform. And sometimes you learn that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and joining that NFL league was even worse. So we didn't even make it past one season. And so then we transitioned to Yahoo, and we transitioned back to Yahoo. And I remember during that time, I noticed as a commissioner, I was getting called out by the other managers for basically implementing new amendments or rules without gaining a consensus or getting everyone's feedback. I think to the point where one of the managers compared me to North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il or Roger Goodell, which take it or leave it. I mean, Goodell ended up being pretty good, but yeah, he's basically hated by a lot of the fans in the NFL space. And then Kim Jong-il, yeah, I don't want to be compared to that guy, but yeah, in all seriousness, it made me think about how I should manage the league as a commissioner. And so yeah, I won't put the managers out there that called me out, but it made me think about commissioning the league in a more holistic way and trying to gather feedback from everybody, keep everybody engaged, because at the end of the day, it's, we're all a group of friends that are just trying to have fun and build camaraderie through the years. This is really our way to connect and our way to keep in touch through the different stages of life. And so yeah, I think as I got out of my 20s and started going to the 30s, I really wanted to focus on, not just winning the league and showing off as a commissioner, hey, I won my own league that I commissioned. I can basically sun the other 11 managers that are below me. No, it wasn't really about that. It was more like, how can we stay involved and stay connected? So basically what I wanted to do was become more trusted, more transparent, and engaging to the league managers. And I just want to say to all the managers that have been part of the leagues that I've commissioned over the last 20 years, y'all get a special shout out. Thank you all for being a manager and just being part of my life in some sort of way, because I think without that connection, it just makes a big difference in reality when we're dealing with all kinds of different things. And so, especially now that I'm hitting 40, which is wow. But yeah, so just kind of going back to how we set up our league is in 2014 we had set up a 2-league promotion relegation system, which was actually brought up by one of our managers through the Facebook chat. Shout out to Zach Best here. And so we did that to improve competitive balance and to make the league more interesting. And in that way, we can introduce more friends that were within our UVA circle and really maintain the standard of the league, which I'm really proud of, and I hope the league managers are as well. And so this is my home fantasy league, and I think fostering traditions and camaraderie is so important because we surely need it in the DMV. We surely need it in this country and the world we live in to get through the day-to-day. So anyone that's listening to this podcast, please provide any feedback, whether you're a fantasy football manager or a fantasy football commissioner, on how you engage your league and how you're able to keep everybody interested. Because especially now that, at least I'll just speak on my behalf, especially now that you kind of hit that middle life where you got kids and you got different kinds of responsibilities going on, you got to find a way to engage people's time. And I think it's really important to not just communicate as a commissioner, but also find ways to keep people interested. And so I'm hoping this podcast could be a tool to enable that. And so for anyone that doesn't know about our league, or even the league managers that don't know about the full history of our league, I'll have the league results year to year, who won the championship and who placed second, for results as early to 2005. And so that'll be on the Substack. That'll be one of the first posts that I'll have on the Substack, is league results since 2005. The Commissioners Podcast back here, going to our next segment, looking at RAS score as an evaluation means to draft prospects based on superior athletic profiles. And so the Washington Commanders years has been looking at elite RAS traits, which essentially means players that have elite physical characteristics and explosive capabilities for their roster. And so Ben Standig is a well-respected and longtime beat reporter for the Washington Commanders, put together a Substack article dated April 3rd about the Commanders looking to RAS, which basically means relative athletic score, as a guide, but not necessarily as a means to select prospects coming out of college. And so in Standig's article, he reports Washington prioritizes elite athletic traits under Anna Peters with top RAS profiles. And so what is RAS exactly? It's basically a metric that captures size, speed, and strength and jumping ability through athletic testing and tracking pro prospects at the annual NFL Combine or a college team's pro day. And that metric is calculated between 0 and 10, with 10 being the best. And RAS has been around since 1987, but it's really become popular over the last few years as teams have honed in on their analytical side to determine which prospects that may be overlooked, that have elite athletic profiles that could be a good fit on their roster. And so in Standig's article, he reports Washington ranked first in combined RAS the last two draft classes. Taking that in mind, we can get an idea on potential prospects the Commanders are interested in. Given that there is a need for a wide receiver opposite Terry McLaurin, who is also coming into a contract year, I was very interested in looking at wide receivers with the top RAS scores in last year's draft class to see how they did and if there is any correlation at all between the top 50 fantasy wide receivers' RAS score and their fantasy performance. So to test this theory, basically I looked at the top RAS score performers from that 2025 wide receiver class, and then wanted to see how they performed in fantasy in terms of fantasy point production in the 2025 season. And so some of the notable receivers that performed well within that RAS testing included Jaden Higgins, who played for the Houston Texans last year, Isaac Tesla for the Detroit Lions, and Torrey Horton, who played for the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. And so looking at the data, the top impact rookie wide receivers, Tatora McMillan and Emeka Egbuka, RAS scores suggested they tested very well, but not in that elite category athletically. And so looking at the data, you could see that Isaiah Naylor out of Nebraska had a RAS score of 10. He had no fantasy points in the 2025 season. Also, Isaac Tesla, who I mentioned before, who came out of Arkansas, had a 9.97 RAS score, and he had 75.9 points as a wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. And then looking at Jaden Higgins, who had the most fantasy points out of those that had an elite athletic profile, he had 211.6 points as the de facto number 2 receiver for the Houston Texans. And so just scrolling down through the list of those players that performed really well from the athletic standpoint, you have Jalen Lane, who was a kick returner for the Commanders. And, he played more of a special teams role. And so he wasn't able to get on the field as much as a rookie, and he scored 49.2 points. But, expect to see him play a bigger role now that he has a rookie season under his belt, a full off season, and a little more confidence, and to hopefully play a more meaningful role on the offense as a target for Jaden Daniels. And then looking through the list as well, another interesting contributor is Tez Johnson out of Oregon. He played for the Buccaneers this past season, and he filled in well with all the injuries to the Buccaneers wide receiver core, and he contributed 92.6 fantasy points, but his RAS score was a 7.66, which is good but not great. So from the rookie class of 2025, you can see that RAS score doesn't necessarily indicate that you'll perform well on the NFL roster. And that obviously that doesn't take into account a lot of different factors, whether it's how quickly they can pick up the playbook, or receivers that they may be behind on the depth chart, or just chemistry with the quarterback, or just the philosophy of the coaching staff. And so I would say RAS score is a helpful tool to evaluate talent, but doesn't cover all the nuances that you'd see on film, or even through the production or data metrics that you see on Pro Football Focus or some of the other scouting databases. And so I take a deeper dive and look at some of the receivers that played, all the NFL receivers that played in the season, and you can see within the top 50, the top 50 fantasy performers, you can see that Puka Nacua finished number 1, Jackson Smith and Jigba finished number 2, Amon-Ra St. Brown finished number 3, and Jamar Chase number 4, and George Pickens from the Cowboys number 5. And I'll have a plot of that data comparing fantasy points scored versus relative athletic score of both the rookie class and also all the top 50 wide receiver performers on the Substack. But really the whole point of this exercise is Puka Nacua tested, quote-unquote, not so great at the combine. I think he ran like a 4.6, and his RAS score was a 5, and he was undoubtedly a top 2 receiver in the NFL, just due to his elite contested catch ability, his football speed after the catch. And the guy is just a great football player regardless of how he tested in the combine. And even Jackson Smith and Jigba, who has elite quickness, didn't run the fastest 40 and isn't the biggest guy, and his RAS score is just a little bit above an 8, which is good but not elite. And he was the number 2 fantasy football performer at the wide receiver position. And obviously, there are elite athletes that finished in the top 10, including Jamar Chase and George Pickens. But once you get past Chris Olave, who finished 7th in fantasy points scored, it's a pretty wide spread of relative athletic scorer profiles with respect to fantasy points scored after the top 10. And so really the take-home message is things have to be looked at nuanced, and having elite athletic traits don't necessarily translate to NFL or fantasy success. And so it becomes a crapshoot as a predictor for fantasy performance. And so it's, like I said, it's just one piece of the puzzle to predict success. And so obviously highlight tape for production and the pre-draft interviews are so important. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how Adam Peters uses this RAS approach again as a significant factor to specifically address the wide receiver 2 position in the draft to improve the offense. And I believe there's a few prospects that are getting some buzz that I'll talk about in the next segment who could be a good fit for the Commanders. All right, I hope y'all haven't gotten tired of me yet, but this is the next segment of the podcast. We'll be covering the 2026 NFL draft prospects that would be of interest to Commanders fans based on known needs. And that's just want to share some of my thoughts on, who I think the Commanders need or what top prospects are relevant to fantasy. And let's go ahead and do a deep dive into it right now. So the top prospects that I think are relevant to the Commanders as they need help at the primarily defensive side of the ball, particularly at pass rush, linebacker, and to some degree the secondary. And so some of the top prospects that stand out that I think will be consensus draftees in the top 10 include David Bailey out of Texas Tech. He's a speed pass rusher with he had over 13 and a half sacks, I believe, in the last season. He's a transfer. He's from Texas Tech, but he's a transfer from Stanford, and the guy is just a complete speed rusher. So I think he's someone that would be interesting to look at. Also, I've heard a lot of buzz on Sonny Styles, linebacker from Ohio State. He's the top prospect, and for those that throw a little bit of money on Vegas, he is a favorite from the betting odds to be a potential draftee of the Washington Commanders. And one great thing about Sonny Styles is he's got the perfect size-speed combination at the linebacker position. He's a RAS GOAT. He's scored a perfect 10. He's got a lot of potential versatility where he can play linebacker, but then he can also move further down the line as a pass rusher. And I believe he had played in the secondary at some point, whether it's at Ohio State or in high school. And so he's really a guy that could really be a nice chess piece for the new defensive coordinator at Washington, who was a disciple of the Brian Flores system in Minnesota, where the Vikings ran a lot of different exotic blitzes and from different angles and points. And so Sonny Styles is a potential fit for the Commanders that would be of interest for fantasy players who maybe can pick up the Commanders' defense this time after a lackluster end to the 2025 season for the defense. The next prospect that I think will definitely go in the top 10 and perhaps in the top 5 as he's been rising significantly is Notre Dame running back Jeremiah Love. He's a big-time top prospect. He's a St. Louis native who was rated as high as number 1 in some NFL draft boards. And The Athletic's Dane Brugler, who's a top-tier draft analyst, describes Love as an explosive athlete with a remarkable blend of balance and burst to be dynamic both as a runner and in the passing game. He is one of the most talented players of the 26 draft class, and he projects as a high-upside NFL weapon. He has good size and supreme speed, running a 4.36 40, and he has the hands to create a dangerous backfield between him and Jaden Daniels. And so I've heard a lot of buzz on him, and I even read an article where he can have an impact on the Commanders similarly to Tony Dorsett for the Cowboys did in 1977. Obviously, I don't remember Tony Dorsett's impact that far back, but it's high praise for Jeremiah Love to be compared to a future Hall of Famer, and he certainly has similar profile. Dorsett, from what I remember, from what I've seen on film, is a high speed guy with kind of more of an upright running style, who could really get to the edge, and I think Love shows a lot of that in his film. And excuse me. And I think with the Washington new offensive coordinator, David Blau, who had worked with mastermind offensive head coach Ben Johnson in Detroit, can scheme Love similarly to how the Lions use Jahmyr Gibbs. And Jahmyr Gibbs is arguably the top 2, top 3 fantasy running back. And the prospect of Love plus a mobile live wire and Jaden Daniels is a tantalizing possibility at number 7. I think if Love can get picked up by the Commanders at number 7, he could potentially put up Bijan Robinson-like numbers in a well-supported offense in his rookie season. He's that good. And then in terms of day 2 picks that are very underrated, in my opinion, that could be useful to the Commanders, if they decide to drop down from number 7, or if they can trade up from their pick in the 3rd round, which is, I believe, in the 70s. There's some prospects that I personally like could be a good fit. And so one guy is Denzel Boston out of University of Washington. He is extremely underrated. I think he's starting to get some buzz now from some of the reports I've been reading more recently, but his highlight tape is ridiculous. He makes great contested catches. He's a dog. He's the son of former NFL wide receiver David Boston, who used to play for the Arizona Cardinals back in the day. That guy was jacked. He probably was 250, he can run a 4.5, and but his son Denzel's done a really nice job at Washington, and he kind of reminds me of Mike Evans. Yeah, he can make the contested catches, but he has good but not great speed, and but still he can make plays down the field. And I think if Washington does trade down from number 7, which I feel like is unlikely, but more so if they trade up from I believe 7 from the 70s to get into the top of the 2nd round, Boston might be there as an option. Another option for day 2 pick at the wide receiver position is Jeremy Bernard out of Alabama. He's super underrated, and he's kind of reminds me of Deebo Samuel because he's highly versatile, and he had over 100 yards rushing in his senior season out of Alabama as the wide receiver. And he scored 2 rushing touchdowns, and shows that not only can he catch the ball, but he can do some work out of the backfield and show threats from behind the line of scrimmage as well as beyond down the field as a pass-catching receiver. And I think he's a very smooth route runner. He's really good after catch. He's able to get into the zones and really make plays. He's got reliable hands. He was a transfer from Washington where he started and then eventually moved to Alabama. He's been very, very productive. And he's just a walking first down chain mover with how smooth he is. The next guy I'd like to mention is Ted Hurst. He's one of those RAS athletic freaks that Adam Peters may be interested in. I think he may even had a visit in Washington recently. His RAS score is 9.92. He's a wide receiver out of Georgia State. He's about 6'3", 6'4", a little over 200 pounds, and he ran around a 4.4 or sub 4.4 40. And the good thing about him is he was very productive. He had over 1,300 yards at his final season at Georgia State. And really my main question with him is the competition and whether he's faced enough elite defensive and secondaries at the college level to ensure that he can make that immediate jump as a rookie where the caliber of talent is going to be much, much higher. And then the next receiver I really want to focus on is a guy that I've seen written about by Ben Standig and some of the other Washington Commander Inside podcasts. Shout out to the Washington Commanders Insider podcast. Got to subscribe to you. And he putting out some good content. But yeah, they talked about DeJon Stribling, wide receiver at Ole Miss. He's a RAS beast with a score of 9.91. He's a big, strong guy, 6'2", 207, runs a 4.36. And the great thing about him, he has solid hands, and his background is also intriguing as he's a son of a military father, according to Dane Brugler's report. So he's all about the business, he's all about the professionalism, and, kind of fits in with that commander mantra. However, his route running ability is not the most refined, but he did work out the slot position and outside receiving positions, and he could also be a potential Deebo Samuel replacement. And so, according to Dane Brugler, he describes Stribling as he's not the most well-rounded in terms of his route success, but he's a big body athlete with strong ball skills and a pro mindset. So he has the talent to settle into a WR2 or WR3 role in an NFL offense. And so I quote this report because Stribling exactly fits the athletic profile Adam Peters is looking for in the pre-draft workouts, and because of his professionalism and competitive mindset and intensity that head coach Dan Quinn emphasizes. And so he's not my absolute favorite wide receiver personally for fantasy football purposes, but he's a good prospect that that should be on the radar for the Washington Commanders fans who are looking to find players for their fantasy team. And then in terms of sleepers and day 3 picks that I think are under the radar include UConn wide receiver Skylar Bell, deep sleeper. The guy is a precise route runner, very good after the catch, nice speed, and he's been extremely productive. Last year he had over 100 catches in his last year at UConn, who had actually a really good season. Who knew that UConn football was relevant at the FBS level, but they actually did pretty well. And while UConn didn't play the strongest schedule, being an independent, UConn did play some big competition games, and Bell did pretty well in those contests. And so because of his underrated athleticism, I think he has a shot to be somewhat of a meaningful, impactful rookie in fantasy if Washington does select him. Next is running back Jamari Taylor out of the University of Virginia. So obviously I have a vested interest in following the Wahoos, and Taylor really can be a good sleeper because he didn't have much around him at UVA, to be honest. Just as a Wahoo fan, I'm just glad we won. We beat Virginia Tech and got 10 wins during this past season because Taylor didn't have a whole lot outside of his quarterback, Chandler Morris. And so he's a former transfer from North Carolina Central University, and he actually led the ACC conference in rushing yards this past year. He had just about 1,000 yards, and he led the ACC in rushing touchdowns, but he also had 1,000 yards. And I think, to quote Dane Brugler's report, he's got a bit of a Bucky Irving comparison. I also see Kareem Hunt in his prime, and I think Kareem Hunt, when he was a rookie, was a guy that wasn't the fastest, wasn't the biggest, but he was extremely tough and broke tons of tackles. And he can ball. And I think the guy, Jamari Taylor, was keyed on so much at UVA that basically they would run somewhat even predictable plays out of the shotgun, whether it's him out the wildcat or him off of a zone read or handoff out the shotgun, and other teams knew it. And he was keyed on so much that Taylor actually had 708 yards after contact, which ranked 27th out of 406 college running backs last year in forced missed tackles. And so, between him breaking tackles and not having the best offensive line support and not having, a ton of elite weapons at UVA, the fact that he still got 14 touchdowns and still carried UVA to a 10-win season is pretty remarkable, considering those limitations, along with the puzzling play calling at times. And so regardless, Taylor is a good sleeper prospect. So I'm curious to see how he's going to do in a traditional NFL offense, especially a team like Washington with David Blau's system, which runs more under the center concepts. And I think if the Commanders don't draft a guy like Jeremiah Love in the first round or another running back high, I think a flyer on Taylor is definitely warranted. I mean, he has elite tackle breaking ability, and he could really complement the existing running back room consisting of Bill Krosky Merritt in the backfield. And The last deep sleeper is also a relative local from the Navy, Eli Heidenreich. Deep sleeper. So he was at Washington's local pro day, I think over the last week or so. And he's interesting because as a running back, he had over 54 receptions for over 900 yards and 500 yards rushing in Navy's offense, which is, primarily just triple option essentially. And so obviously the offense that he played in isn't going to translate to the NFL level, but his skill set does. And there is actually a game where he had over 200 yards receiving, and if you look at his athletic profile, he ran, I think, a 4.4. He's not the biggest guy. I think he's like around 5'8", 5'9", 195, 200 pounds. And I think if he's used right, he can be a sleeper, big-time fantasy contributor because he can do a lot of things well, even with relatively low volume, because he can catch the ball out the backfield. He's really good after the catch receiving the ball, and he's also a dependable running back as well. And he's from the Navy, so he's probably a guy that has a strong work ethic. He's going to be professional. It fits the whole mantra that Dan Quinn is clamoring for in his third season as a head coach. And so if Heidenreich is in the right team and he's used properly, think of Danny Woodhead archetypes in terms of fantasy potential. And some of the defensive prospects that could impact the Commanders from a fantasy standpoint include Mansour Delane, a cornerback from LSU. He's not super big or athletic, but scouts say he's the most pro-ready DB in the class. Shadows receivers extremely well and is extremely competitive, according to some of the scouting reports I've read on The Athletic and NFL Draft Buzz. And he's a former Hokie transfer from Virginia Tech, and so he's obviously played great competition in the SEC and then prior to that in the ACC. So I think he's someone that could be an option at 7 potentially and could get you interceptions for your fantasy team. Also, linebacker Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech, really underrated guy. And he's also a former UVA recruit as a quarterback way back when Bronco Mendenhall was coaching, I think back in 2020 or 2021. But he converted to linebacker after he transferred to Texas Tech and basically just ran the show on the defensive side. And he won many awards, was extremely productive. And he's a guy that's all over the field, and he could be a Bobby Wagner replacement. As you know, Bobby Wagner is getting up there in age. Another safety I like that may not be talked about but could also be a good fit for the Commanders is Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, safety out of Toledo. He's a ball hawk, and he's able to create turnovers. In the last year, he forced 3 fumbles, had 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 picks. A guy that I think also could be an option and is a very good fit for that RAS athletic profile is Jake Golday, linebacker from Cincinnati. Kind of reminds me of Leo Chanel, probably not as big as the former Kansas City Chief, but he's been really productive, has really good speed. He might be more developmental or may not be ready to play as quickly as Rodriguez, but he's an option to consider. And lastly is the University of Miami cornerback Keontae Scott. I think he's a dog, crazy underrated. Also is a RAS beast with a score of 9.71. He may fall due to being 25. He's obviously that's a bit old coming in as a rookie, but he did start. So his journey came from the JUCO level at the very beginning before moving to Miami, and I think he's my favorite non-first round cornerback prospect. Just check his tape. I mean, he's all over the field, just playing very aggressive to the ball, making plays, and I think he's a guy that could fit in with Dan Quinn's system.
Yo, check it.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for listening to the first iteration of the Commissioner's Corner Fantasy Football Podcast, catering to the DMV and the Wahoo Legacy League. We'll see you next time.